Good evening. I'm Nova Blake, and this is your complete briefing for Wednesday, April 8th, 2026. Tonight, the United States and Iran are in a fragile two-week ceasefire. But attacks continued in the hours after it took effect, the terms remain disputed, and American forces are staying on the ground with orders ready to restart at a moment's notice. Let's get into it. Starting with the top stories from across the American political landscape, the United States and Iran entered a historic two-week ceasefire on Wednesday, the first pause in 40 days of active warfare since Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th. President Trump announced the deal Tuesday evening, hours before his own deadline expired, saying the suspension of bombing is subject to Iran agreeing to a complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's Supreme National Security Council accepted the ceasefire and confirmed that shipping through the strait would be permitted for 2 weeks via coordination with Iranian armed forces. The ceasefire showed immediate signs of strain on its very first day. Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates both reported fresh Iranian drone attacks Wednesday morning, hours after the truce was declared. Kuwait's defense ministry said its armed forces intercepted 28 drones in an intense wave of hostile Iranian attacks, some of which struck vital oil facilities, power stations, and water desalination plants, causing, in its words, significant material damage. Iran denied violating the ceasefire, while the White House called reports that Iran had reclosed the strait as false. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declared at the Pentagon on Wednesday that American forces will remain in the Middle East on full combat readiness throughout the two-week period. Hegseth said the Pentagon has, in his words, done its part, and that American troops are prepared to defend, prepared to go on offense, and prepared to restart at a moment's notice if Iran violates the terms. He also warned that the United States knows exactly what Iran has in terms of enriched uranium, saying the U.S. will take it out if Iran does not hand it over. The Islamabad peace talks, brokered by Pakistan, are now scheduled to begin Friday, April 10th, with delegations from the United States and Iran meeting in Pakistan's capital city. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif welcomed the ceasefire as a display of remarkable wisdom by both parties and said he earnestly hopes the talks will succeed in achieving sustainable peace. Pakistan has been the sole direct communication channel between Washington and Tehran throughout the 6-week conflict. A major complication emerged Wednesday as Israel declared that the ceasefire does not cover its ongoing fight against Hezbollah in Lebanon. The Israeli military launched what it described as its largest coordinated strike on Lebanon since the war began, striking multiple neighborhoods in Beirut during morning rush hour. Lebanon's civil defense reported more than 250 people killed and more than 1,100 wounded in Israeli attacks on Wednesday alone. Pakistani Prime Minister Sharif publicly called on all parties to respect the ceasefire, implicitly criticizing Israel's continued Lebanon campaign. The terms of the ceasefire remain sharply disputed between the two sides. Iran's state media reported that its accepted 10-point plan includes the phrase acceptance of enrichment regarding its uranium program, a term that was notably absent from English-language versions distributed to journalists. President Trump posted Wednesday that there will be no enrichment of uranium, directly contradicting that element of Iran's described agreement. Secretary of State Marco Rubio previously stated the American 15-point plan makes clear Iran can never have nuclear weapons. Vice President J.D. Vance, traveling in Budapest on Wednesday, welcomed what he called a fragile truce and urged Iran to negotiate in good faith. Vance warned that President Trump is not one to mess around, adding that if Iran did not come to the negotiating table, they would find out what that means. His visit to Budapest, one of Trump's closest ideological allies in Europe, came as the administration sought to demonstrate diplomatic engagement amid ongoing NATO tensions. President Trump stated Wednesday on Truth Social that Washington would work closely with Iran, which he described as having gone through what will be a very productive regime change. Trump also said Iran had agreed there would be no enrichment of uranium and that the United States would, working with Iran, remove all enriched material from the country. Iran has not publicly confirmed either of those specific commitments. 2 commercial ships were spotted transiting the Strait of Hormuz on Wednesday morning, the first vessels to pass through the waterway since the war began. A Liberia-flagged bulk carrier and a Greek-owned bulk carrier made the crossing in the early morning hours following the ceasefire announcement. Before the war, the strait carried roughly 20 million barrels of oil per day, along with 1/5 of global liquefied natural gas supply. Ship tracking data shows that 187 tankers laden with 172 million barrels of oil remain stranded inside the Gulf, waiting for conditions to clear. World leaders across Europe and Asia greeted the ceasefire announcement with relief while calling for a durable follow-through. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu all praised the announcement. Bahrain announced it would reopen its national airspace on Wednesday, one of the first concrete signs of regional normalization. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas called for sustained diplomatic effort to convert the pause into a permanent settlement, now turning to Washington and the latest actions from the current administration. Here are 10 significant developments from the administration this week. President Trump announced the 2-week ceasefire in a Truth Social post late Tuesday, saying he agreed to suspend the bombing and attack of Iran, subject to Iran's complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz. He described the arrangement as a double-sided ceasefire and said that almost all of the various points of past contention had been agreed to between the United States and Iran. The agreement was brokered by Pakistan and will be followed by formal negotiations beginning in Islamabad on Friday. The United States military was given the order to cease all offensive operations against Iran, effective immediately following the ceasefire announcement, 2 officials confirmed. Defense Secretary Hegseth stated at a Pentagon briefing that American military forces remain in place and ready to resume combat operations at a moment's notice if Iran is found to be violating the terms. The Pentagon also confirmed it is actively monitoring Iran's enriched uranium stockpile and will take action if Tehran does not surrender it. President Trump declared Wednesday that Iran has undergone what will be a very productive regime change, and that the country's defense industrial base has been completely destroyed. Defense Secretary Hegseth echoed that claim at the Pentagon, saying Iran can no longer build missiles, rockets, launchers, or drones, and that its factories have been, in his words, razed to the ground, set back in historic fashion. These claims could not be independently verified as of this broadcast, and Iran has publicly disputed them. The Trump administration is now pressing the Islamabad talks this Friday as the first structured diplomatic channel to convert the temporary ceasefire into a permanent settlement. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told reporters the president's red lines, including no uranium enrichment in Iran, have not changed and that negotiators will work to align Iran's 10-point plan with the administration's 15-point proposal. A source familiar with the process told media outlets that the gaps between the two sides remain very significant. President Trump signed a presidential memorandum last Friday, directing the Department of Homeland Security to pay all of its more than 35,000 employees affected by the 50-day partial government shutdown, bypassing Congress to issue the payments. The memo covered Federal Emergency Management Agency workers, Coast Guard civilians, and cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency professionals who have been without paychecks since February 14th. Congress is expected to vote on a formal DHS funding resolution when lawmakers return from recess the week of April 13th. The Trump administration's fiscal year 2027 budget request, released last Friday, seeks $1.5 trillion for the Pentagon, a 42% increase over current levels. The budget pairs record defense spending with $73 billion in cuts to domestic programs, including clean energy grants, the Internal Revenue Service, agriculture, and education. Democrats called the budget morally bankrupt, and Republican Senator Susan Collins said the domestic cuts went too far. Defense Secretary Hegseth publicly stated Wednesday that had Iran refused the ceasefire terms, the next targets would have been Iranian power plants, bridges, and oil and energy infrastructure. Hegseth called the ceasefire a pause, not a peace, and reiterated that American forces are watching and ready. His remarks reinforced the administration's position that military pressure remains the primary instrument of American policy even within the ceasefire window. Acting Attorney General Blanche confirmed this week that the Justice Department will not be prioritizing the Epstein files investigation going forward. The House Oversight Committee, in a bipartisan statement, said Congress will still require Bondi to testify under subpoena about her handling of the case. The committee's position is that a cabinet firing does not extinguish Congress's subpoena authority. The White House confirmed Wednesday that Lebanon is not part of the ceasefire agreement and relayed that message to all parties involved. Press Secretary Leavitt told reporters that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu had assured President Trump that Israel would continue to be a helpful partner throughout the ceasefire period. Israel's continued strikes on Lebanon, including the deadly Wednesday attacks on Beirut, have created significant international diplomatic pressure on the United States to clarify the boundaries of the ceasefire agreement. Oil prices fell sharply on Wednesday following the ceasefire announcement, with West Texas Intermediate crude dropping $18 to around $94 per barrel, a decline of nearly 16%, and Brent crude falling similarly to $93. Despite the sharp drop, both benchmarks remained significantly above their pre-war levels of around $67 per barrel. Natural gas futures also declined close to 5%, providing some relief to American consumers already facing gas prices above $4 per gallon. That's your full briefing for Wednesday, April 8th, 2026. I'm Nova Blake. Stay informed, stay ahead. We'll see you next time.